I'm Melisa Idris, and you're watching The Brand, the show about advertising, how it works and how it works on us. Now, today we're going to look at digital outdoor advertising and how it's being innovated by AI technology, artificial intelligence technology. And joining me on the show, I have the good folks from Lantern Media. We have Paul Versley, the co-founder of Lantern Media, as well as Leon Liu, who's also a co-founder. And there's a third co-founder as well who can't make it on the show today. His name is
Chester Ho.
Chester Ho. But thank you both for being on the show with me to discuss this. I'd like to, I guess, set the scene first with a look at what Lantern Media does, because the company essentially is a provider of LED screens across several malls in the Klang Valley. But these LED screens are no typical LED screens that we see. It's powered by AI technology. So tell me a little bit more. Paul, why don't you start?
Well, Melissa, thanks first of all for having us. As you said correctly, Lantern Media is a media company. We're in the field of digital out of home. We are in malls. We have screens, as you mentioned, LED screens in 9 malls in Klang Valley today, 130 screens. And what's special about us and our screens is essentially we use AI to track how many people see the content, which is a big challenge in out of home, that people don't really know how many people look at billboards. Yeah. And we try to kind of disrupt that space by allowing advertisers to track with facial recognition, which we make happen using a camera at top of our screen, how many people actually consume this content. We also try to be interactive. All the screens are touch screens, which means that brands can engage the audience. They can get people to play games, to take a bit more than just watch.
All right. So Leon, for those, say, who may not have come across a screen like this in a mall, explain how it works. So it's essentially a digital screen, a billboard, and there's a little camera, there's a pinhole camera on it. So say I'm walking past one of these screens, what happens?
So you can think of it as a 55-inch iPad.
Okay.
Right? It's touchscreen, it's interactive. The camera, if you stand within 2 meters of it for at least 1.5 seconds, it assigns an age and gender to you based on our software.
Okay.
So it is going to use AI to measure the distance between your eyes, distance between your ears, distance between your chin and your forehead, and give you a facial identity. And then run it against the database and assign an age and gender to you.
Okay, so these features can tell you if I'm a man or a woman.
Yep.
And then how accurate is the age approximation?
So the age is around ±6 years.
Okay.
The gender is very accurate, 90 over percentile.
Okay.
You'll guess correctly.
All right, so determining age and gender of the people passing by, and how quickly can this camera capture this information?
So it's not for passersby,
Oh.
it's for someone who stands directly in front of our device.
I see.
For at least 1.5 seconds,
Okay.
within 2 meters, and that's how it identifies you. Or that's when it identifies you.
Okay, so someone who is actually taking an interest in the screen and the
Yes.
information on the screen,
Yes.
then it registers the data from that
Yes.
person's face. Now, I kind of want to talk about, so this is the new wave of mall advertising. I kind of want to talk about some of the traditional forms of in-mall advertising and out-of-home advertising, which in my head, immediately you say out-of-home advertising, you think billboards, you think those pillar wraps you see on the highways, or you see perhaps, in malls, you see escalator wraps or digital displays, for instance. Talk to me about how if you think that those types of advertising still has a role to play or a place in the advertising landscape. Paul, what do you think?
It is still very relevant in this day and age. Even now in advertising as a whole, obviously a lot of budget is being spent on mobile online advertising, which means content that you consume on your phone, on your desktop. However, if we think about the different types of media, there's obviously radio, there's TV, there's out of home, there's newspapers, and there's online. And a common trend across radio, TV, and newspapers is that's all content that I consume, and I consume it on my phone these days, right? I can listen to the radio on my phone, I can listen to a podcast, I read the Star online, I watch Netflix. So all of this is kind of being displaced by digital. Whereas billboards, I mean, if I'm driving, I can't look at my phone, so I'm still going to be looking at billboards. And similarly, when I'm walking, I'm still looking at out-of-home advertising space. That's why this media form is still relevant. And we see that if we look at the media spent across all these different channels that I mentioned, Out-of-home and digital are the only ones that are still growing. Everything else declining.
What do you think, Leon? Do you agree that there's still a space for the traditional type of out-of-home advertising? And what's changing about this area of advertising?
I agree with Paul, of course. That's why we're in this business, right? We partner with
But you're disrupting the traditional model. You guys are trying to disrupt it through AI, right?
We're giving people more accountability. We're giving brands, we're giving agencies more data accountability. That's really one of the main ways.
What do you mean data accountability?
So if you advertise with a out-of-home vendor now, out-of-home media owner,
Okay.
they're going to let you know how many, for example, on a highway, how many cars drove by this highway, and they say X amount of cars drove by, therefore X amount of people saw your ad. We want to take it up a notch. We want to tell you how many people actually stood in front, like we were discussing earlier, stood in front of the screen, actually engaged
with the content.
interacted with your ad, and that's a number we want to produce to the brands.
Okay.
Right? That's how we're disrupting it. As far as screens are concerned, you're talking about traditional advertising in malls, pillar wraps, escalator wraps. That still works for some brands. But our devices in the mall cater to different types of campaigns. We can change content daily. We can change it hourly. We can change it on a monthly basis. You can run 5 different videos concurrently. You cannot do this with a sticker on a wall.
Right, which is static. It won't,
Yes.
You can't change it
Yes.
frequently, and if you do, it involves a lot of cost.
Correct.
So what kind of clients or what kind of brands do you guys work with?
It's a real wide variety, to be honest, between local brands, international brands. Some of the brands that we've worked with include Maybank, BMW, Malaysia Airlines, Guardian. So yeah, there's a real variety of agencies, direct clients, smaller companies, bigger companies.
Okay, but coming back to what Leon mentioned a little bit earlier about these traditional in-mall advertising, one thing they have is impact. So even though they might be static and you can't change them frequently, they have a lot of impact to to pedestrians, to mall patrons, versus say frequency as perhaps what you guys can provide. So talk to me about the trade-off for brands when it comes to impact versus frequency. Leon?
For bigger formats, what we call large formats, you get like a very hard punch to the face one time. Okay? So
One-time punch.
one time. It's going to hurt that one time. Our smaller formats, we make them up in quantity. So in a mall, we can put between 10 and 30 of these devices. So instead of getting punched one time hard in the face, we maybe flick your face 100 times. Right? And that's the difference between how we're doing it.
Okay.
And we're not saying that we are necessarily better than any other player. For data accountability, we are, right? Because we're telling brands how many people actually saw your brand. We're not just saying how many people in the mall. 5 million people in the mall, 5 million people saw your brand. That's inaccurate.
Okay.
What we're saying is, for data accountability, we are better. For the type of inventory that we have, we're different.
Okay.
If you want to get punched one time hard in the face, bam, impact. If you want to get jentik 100 times on your face, then you go with frequency. So there isn't necessarily one that's better than the other. It's
Okay.
just which one suits the campaign,
The brand and the
suits the
campaign.
brand, right? I'll give you an example. Some brands, some really premium brands, they only allow you to do static on a certain size, like a 12 feet by 10 feet. And that's their brand guideline. So naturally, there has to be inventory that caters to these types of brands.
Sure.
Right? We can't cater to those brands because our format is not static and not 10 feet by 12 feet. We are a 55-inch screen.
That will flick you constantly.
Yes, that will flick you constantly.
I quite like that analogy. It's really quite
true.
descriptive. All right,
Yeah.
we're going to come back and continue our conversation right here on The Brand, so stay with us. Hi, welcome back to The Brand. I'm Melisa Idris. I've got Paul and Leon here with me. They're the good folks from Lantern Media. We're talking about digital out-of-home advertising, specifically powered by AI or artificial technology. Now, out-of-home used to be the last medium on any kind of media planner's list because marketers essentially had no idea if it worked, right? Because the entire strategy was about brand awareness as opposed to measurable metrics. Now, with artificial technology, artificial intelligence, digital out-of-home can now look to generate real revenue. So you can translate advertising into sales, especially if you're talking about what you guys are doing in mall advertising. So I want to come back to something you said a little bit earlier before the break, Leon, about how billboards, while static, have a lot of impact. It's like getting punched in the face one time, as opposed to a smaller screen, and then that's a more frequent assault to the senses, shall I say. But talk to me about how that can translate to real revenue for real measurable metrics and revenue for brand owners. Paul, do you want to pick it up?
Sure. Good point that you're making. Obviously, now that an impact of digital is that across all media channels, brands are asking for more data about ROI. And there really is a variety of ways to go about it. There's no real exact science to be honest. In malls, obviously, the easiest way is if you have a shop in the mall, because then you can simply look at a month where you didn't have advertising on our screens, and then the next month you had advertising on our screens. Okay, and what is the delta in sales? So how much did my sales increase month over month with ads versus without ads? That's a very simple way to look at it. There's also other ways, say if you don't have a shop in the mall, for example, BMW. There's obviously no shop in the mall that you can attribute these sales to.
Right.
However, based on mobile phones, based on the identifiers of the phones, you can actually tell, say, these 400,000 people were in the mall across month A, and then in months B, C, and D, let's say, how many of those did actually go to a BMW showroom? So you can have some accountability attribution. You can probably say that, after I've concluded this campaign, 3% of people who watched my ad actually ended up going to a BMW showroom. Right. So that's one way to look at these things. However, in the bigger picture, it's one common theme that we see today is that a lot of brands and agencies are getting very nitty-gritty about clicks and impressions, which they see from digital, and they are trying to replicate the same for all other media formats. However, there is still an impact of branding that is not to be neglected. That is a long-term play, which is really, it's tough to measure it in clicks, because if you watch a TV ad, it's similar. There's no direct link that, oh, I'm going to buy this product now, but it's on top of my mind. If I think of shampoo, I think of Head & Shoulders.
Right, so brand awareness, that kind of brand recall has to also be the long-term strategy, right? Leon, you also mentioned that all the screens are interactive, so it's all touch screen. So you can measure a certain level of engagement. So in a sense, there is a little bit of overlap in terms of digital, right?
Yes.
So how have you, so in terms of the data that you have right now, how engaged are people when they're standing in front of these screens? Like what are they looking for? I mean, what are they clicking on, and how do you catch people's attention? Because you have it for just a little while, you know what I mean?
How we do it, we try our best to advise the brands that the creative, the video, it has to be engaging. You have to have compelling enough content where people in the mall will give you their 2 seconds.
Right.
Will stop and say, hey, there's a cool ad, or there's a nice feature for that new BMW, or that's a very good promo that new e-wallet is giving to us. Okay. So it starts with the creative. What we can do is we enable brands with our devices to get that interaction. So if you have an ad that says, spend 10 ringgit with the new Maybank e-wallet, and you can get up to 10,000 ringgit in some kind of bonanza. People stop, they scan, and then they tap, they can get more information. Right. Because it's interactive, right? Remember, you tap on our screens, you go to, say, Maybank's landing page. Then you can interact with whatever is on their landing page, be it a game, be it a form, be it a QR to scan. So it starts with the creative, and then our technology enables that interaction.
Right.
Because again, if it's just a sticker, there's nothing interactive.
Yeah.
I don't stop for 2 seconds. I need something to cue me to stop.
Of course, yeah.
And that's how we do it.
And it's getting even more challenging, trying the competition for
Yes.
people's
For attention.
Exactly.
Attention is tough.
Do you think it's perhaps a little easier in malls because people are already in that kind of shopping frame of mind?
Of course.
Yeah.
I think, back to what we're talking about just now, billboards, right? You can't tap a billboard. You can't interact with a billboard.
Right.
It's on the highway. It's 100 feet up. With ours, I agree, right? You're in the mall, you're in the mood to shop, you're walking around, you want to look at new things, you want to experience new experiences. AR, touchscreen, a game, children like it, adults bring their children to it. So I think the mall is the perfect place for a large group of people, consistently large groups of people at a location, and our screens are consistently there.
So here's the drawback, right? I mean, and I'm guessing this could be a challenge within this industry. The conversations around data collection, data consent, and data privacy. So as you've got this advertising, this mode of advertising, someone standing, say I'm standing in front of the screen and I'm giving you my 2 seconds.
Yes.
How
Thank you.
do I consent? I mean, how do you know that I've consented to this data being collected, and what are you doing with the data?
Well, you're not actively giving consent as such. However, as you enter the malls, you essentially accept the bylaws of the mall. And as opposed to other forms of advertising, we don't track person-related data. So we comply with all of Malaysia's PDP. We will only track metadata. So we don't store the footage, the videos. We really only track, say, your age and your gender. We wouldn't know, okay, you've been to Mall A in this week and you're going to Mall B in another week. That being said, another way that we can use the data is going back on the interaction that we mentioned before, actually as part of a campaign. One campaign that I would like to highlight is a campaign we recently ran with Malaysia Airlines and their agency M6, where we actually used the camera to target advertising to different audience in the mall. So let's say I walk up to the screen and the screen at that point said, let us recommend a travel destination to you. And then based out of the database that Malaysia Airlines obviously have of different people buying different flights to different destinations, it would recommend to me, say, Bali. Perhaps to you, it would recommend Tokyo. And so that's another way that the data and the camera can be used in a campaign to make it more interactive without being intrusive and without tracking your phone, without knowing that, oh, you're Melisa, I can connect it to your Facebook profile or something like that. We want to be as unintrusive but targeted as possible.
So the way to see it is the fact that rather than have your day be bombarded by commercial messages which are not targeted, the idea also is to have more targeted, tailored messages to you so you get what you're looking for when it comes to these brands. Okay, all right. Do you want to add to that, Leon? Because for me, I think there's also challenges in operating in this space when it comes to convincing people because there's a certain trust deficit when it comes to how data is being used. We've seen that with Facebook and all the social media platforms. How do you talk to your clients and perhaps to explain to people who are consumers who've brought this concern up to you?
I think without spooking people, what we discuss a lot about people's privacy is that we live in an age where privacy is not very private anymore. Right? The types of consent that consumers give at the consumer level to, as you mentioned, Facebook, Google, eclipses whatever data that Lantern Media is working with. An example is if you step into the mall, CCTVs capture your footage. CCTVs are watching you. If the mall wanted to, if the property owner wanted to, they could pair their CCTVs with existing software that can track Melisa Idris from this place to the next place and identify you and go, okay, I know Melisa Idris comes in every Wednesday and therefore we're going to have certain things for Melisa, right? Now, that's used from a marketing standpoint. And consumers, what they like is they like reaping the benefit of that non-privacy. Hey, if I just got married and tomorrow I get a coupon from IKEA, hey, you got a 100 ringgit voucher from IKEA. I'm like, wow, what a
Yes.
coincidence. Not a coincidence, right? It's not a
Yeah.
coincidence. But then I like the coupon. But I don't know, consumers don't appreciate when they
Right.
find out how that
Process is.
process
okay.
happened.
Okay.
So we, like Paul said, we don't do that. What I'm just saying is, if the malls that we work with and we partner with wanted to, they could.
We're gonna come back and continue this conversation. Stay with us on The Brand, coming up next. Welcome back to The Brand. I'm Melisa Idris. I've got Lantern Media here with me. We're talking about digital out-of-home advertising. It's arguably one of the oldest, I would say, and most enduring forms of mass advertising, but it's going through a bit of a disruption now with artificial intelligence. Where do you see the future of digital out-of-home advertising, moving forward? Right now, it's powered by artificial intelligence. What could we see next? I mean, besides just facial recognition?
Well, I think there's two clear trends. One is the first one you've mentioned already. I mean, if you say it's already being disrupted, really we're the first player in Malaysia to have this technology, and I sure hope that other players are going to adopt this as well, because brand owners, agencies are always asking for more data, as we've mentioned. So that's point one. I think we've talked about that quite well. Point two is what we call programmatic advertising, which means that brands can dynamically change content or target based on certain audience or weather or traffic conditions, whatever it is. So let's say I have a billboard at the highway, and based on the number of Continental cars that park at the traffic light on the other side of the road, I show them a Mercedes ad, because that's who I want to target.
Wow.
That's what we call programmatic advertising. So there's different levels of adoption, obviously. It's still in its very early grassroots stage right now, but that's something we definitely believe is going to become more of a mainstay over time.
Okay, so real time and targeted, I guess also perhaps time segmented, if you're looking at rush hour,
Correct.
a certain type of footfall that you're looking for. And what about Lantern Media? What's next for you guys?
Before programmatic even happens, and I agree, we are preparing for a programmatic future, but in order to arrive at this future, there needs to be connected devices.
Okay.
If you don't have the inventory being if you don't have the medium, if you don't have, in layman terms, if you don't have connected screens, that means these screens are connected to the internet connected to our CMS, we're not going to have that future, because you can't change content on, again, a static device, you can't change content in real time.
Right.
But if a screen is connected to the internet, I can change content on that screen in real time.
Are most screens connected to the internet?
No.
Or not yet?
No, not yet. And that's what we are preparing for. So if you're asking for what our roadmap is, we are building a network of inventory of connected devices that will then prepare us for a programmatic future.
How far are we from that? If you're taking a look at the current inventory of screens at the moment that are perhaps offline, how far away are we from having a connected network of screens?
It's not about when you'll have a connected screen, it's how many, right? Because if you only have a few, then it doesn't make sense for a brand to invest that budget into, say, 10 screens, because there's not enough coverage. But if you had, for example, 2,000 screens nationwide, where each device is connected and I can control content on each device in real time, that's a different
ball game altogether. Yeah.
Correct.
All right.
So how many people are converting their screens left and right? If you look on the highway, a lot of static billboards are now becoming a big TV, essentially, a big screen.
Yeah, you'll see that at traffic junctions.
Correct. They're converting slowly. But we are, again, we're not competing with large format. We are going to build 1,000, 2,000 inventory strong number of connected devices. And we will build this over the next 1.5, 2 years. That's what we're
One of the challenges that I see with out-of-home advertising is that this business, Paul, is very concession-centric. So it's tied up in a handful of concessionaires, right? How do you guys navigate that obstacle?
Well, You're totally right. Traditionally, if we look at out-of-home, the most common locations are at the highway. They're in transit, say, at the MRT or KDM stations. They're at the airport. Now, what do all these locations have in common, right? As you said, you need to work closely with the government to be able to get those concessions, and they're usually awarded to a single party over a long term, like a 10-year contract. And they're tough to break into, especially for a small company, right? I mean, we're a small company. We're less than 2 years old, right? So it's tough to break into that space. And the way we try to really capture a niche for us is by working with private-owned commercial entities. So malls obviously are for-profit driven entities. They have very clear decision-making. It's relatively easy. If I make enough money for the mall, they're going to kick me around. It's a simple logic, right?
That, yeah.
And this likewise for other locations that we're looking at now, whether it's office towers, petrol stations, gyms, we are looking to work with private entities who have the same interests that we do. And that's one way for us to ensure that, you know, the value that we generate in Lantern Media and that we share with our partners. Currently it's malls, that it's coherent and the interests are aligned across the partners.
Understood. Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for the show today, gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining me on the show to talk about this. I'm Melisa Idris, and you've been watching The Brand. I'll be back with you same time next week. I'll see you then.